March 14th, 1943, North Atlantic, 400 nautical miles southwest of Iceland. Kapitänleutnant Hans-Georg Hess stood motionless in the cramped radio room of U-523, staring at the encryption machine that had just sealed his fate. The message he had transmitted to BDU headquarters 47 minutes earlier, a routine position report containing his grid coordinates and fuel status, had been his death warrant. What Hess could not know, as he studied the grey metal face of his Enigma machine, was that 3 separate Allied listening stations had already triangulated his submarine's exact position. On the windswept coast of Scotland, in the concrete bunkers of RAF Scarinish, operators hunched over rotating antenna arrays had captured his transmission. 400 miles to the south, Royal Navy specialists at HMS Flowerdown had recorded the same signal. Across the Atlantic, American technicians at Naval Communications Station Cheltenham had logged the frequency, bearing, and precise timing of U-523's radio call. In less than 20 minutes, aircraft would be dispatched to hunt down Hess and his crew. The young captain believed his brief transmission had passed unnoticed into the vast electromagnetic void of the Atlantic. Instead, it had painted a target on his submarine visible to every Allied anti-submarine coordinator within 1,000 miles. For 3 years, German U-boat commanders had operated under a fundamental misconception about radio security that would cost the Kriegsmarine over 28,000 lives. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. They had been taught that their encrypted transmissions were unbreakable, that brief radio calls posed minimal risk, that the ocean's vastness provided natural protection against detection. On this grey morning in 1943, Hess was about to learn a terrifying truth that had already claimed hundreds of his fellow submarine commanders. The Allies possessed technology that could track every radio transmission, plot the source to within a few miles, and dispatch hunting forces before a U-boat could dive to safety. What none of these submariners understood was that this single radio call represented the final piece of a technological puzzle that had transformed the Battle of the Atlantic. Over the previous 18 months, German U-boat crews had experienced systematic destruction, not from improved depth charges or better aircraft, but from a network of radio detection stations that stripped away their most fundamental protection: invisibility. The mathematics of submarine warfare were being rewritten not in torpedo calculations or diving procedures, but in radio waves that betrayed the position of every U-boat that dared to communicate with headquarters. The collapse of German submarine effectiveness had begun with signals intelligence, and the journey toward this moment had started 30 years earlier in the muddy trenches of the Western Front. British signals intelligence, desperate to intercept German military communications during the Great War, had begun experimenting with directional radio detection in 1916. The War Office's experimental stations, working with primitive equipment in requisitioned country estates, developed the first operational direction-finding sets in 1917. But the armistice came before these devices could significantly impact submarine warfare. Only 2 U-boats in the entire Great War were credited to radio interception. The technology that would revolutionize anti-submarine warfare gestated slowly during the 1920s and 30s. British engineers at the Government Code and Cipher School, working in collaboration with the Royal Navy's Signal Intelligence Division, refined the basic principles of high-frequency direction finding. The system they developed, designated HFDF but universally known as HFDUF, worked by detecting radio transmissions and measuring the bearing from which signals arrived. When multiple stations recorded the same transmission, operators could plot intersecting bearing lines to determine the transmitter's location. By 1939, the Royal Navy possessed a rudimentary network of shore-based HFDF stations around the British Isles. These early installations were crude affairs. The antenna arrays, massive rotating constructions requiring manual operation, had to be precisely aligned by trained operators using mechanical bearing indicators. Range accuracy depended entirely on atmospheric conditions and signal strength. The system couldn't determine whether a transmission originated from a surface ship or submerged submarine, only the general location of the radio transmitter. Operators using oscilloscopes and bearing calculators had to distinguish genuine military transmissions from commercial shipping traffic, amateur radio operators, and electromagnetic interference from industrial sources. Yet by 1941, the Royal Navy's confidence in HF/DF had grown sufficiently that Admiralty planners began incorporating direction-finding intelligence into convoy routing decisions. Every major naval facility possessed HF/DF equipment. Training schools produced hundreds of operators. Anti-submarine warfare doctrine assumed that German radio transmissions could be tracked and exploited for tactical advantage. This confidence would prove devastatingly accurate. September 3, 1939. Within hours of Britain's declaration of war on Germany, German U-boat commanders began transmitting routine operational reports to Admiral Karl Donitz's headquarters in Wilhelmshaven. These messages, encrypted using the supposedly unbreakable Enigma machine, contained detailed information about patrol positions, fuel consumption, torpedo expenditure, and enemy contact reports. German submarine doctrine required frequent communication with shore headquarters. U-boat commanders were expected to report their positions every 48 hours, request tactical guidance for attack approaches, and coordinate with other submarines operating in the same general area. This communication requirement, designed to maximize operational efficiency and ensure proper coordination of submarine wolfpack tactics, would prove to be the Kriegsmarine's fatal vulnerability. Kapitänleutnant Günther Prien, Otto Kretschmer, and Joachim Schepke led their boats on devastating early war patrols, sinking Allied shipping with minimal losses while maintaining regular radio contact with headquarters. Admiral Dönitz, commanding the U-boat force from his concrete bunker in Lorient, watched with satisfaction as his submarines achieved what became known as the First Happy Time. German submariners operated with carefully cultivated confidence in their communication security. Submarine training emphasized that Enigma encryption was mathematically unbreakable, that brief transmissions posed negligible detection risk, that the ocean's electromagnetic environment provided natural concealment for radio signals. The encryption machine, instructors taught, generated millions of possible combinations for each message. Allied code breakers might intercept transmissions, but decryption would require computational resources that simply did not exist. This doctrinal certainty permeated every level of U-boat operations. Funkmeister Wolfgang Hirschfeld, senior radio operator aboard U-109, recorded in his wartime diary, written during actual patrols. "We transmitted our position reports without concern. The British might hear our signals, but they cannot read them. Even if they could break our codes, which is impossible, they would need to know exactly where we transmitted from. The ocean is vast. Our radio signal provides no location, information." This fundamental misunderstanding of Allied capabilities would soon be corrected through brutal experience. The first German U-boat crew to realize their radio transmissions were being tracked experienced not just tactical surprise but existential shock. When Allied HF/DF stations plotted a submarine's transmission, aircraft could be dispatched to the source location within 30 minutes. Unlike random patrol searches that might spend hours covering empty ocean, HF/DF-directed aircraft flew directly to predetermined coordinates where German submarines had revealed their presence through their own radio calls. The transformation from hunter to hunted happened not through visual contact or sonar detection, but through electromagnetic betrayal that preceded any physical encounter. Oberleutnant zur See Herbert Werner, serving as communications officer aboard U-230 during his second war patrol in August 1942, experienced his introduction to HF/DF direction finding while transmitting a routine fuel report south of Nova Scotia. His post-war memoir, Iron Coffins, captured the moment when the technological reality became impossible to ignore. The Liberator appeared 28 minutes after I had finished transmitting our position to headquarters. 28 minutes. The aircraft approached from the exact bearing of our transmission antenna, flew directly to our location without searching, and dropped depth charges with precision that suggested the pilot knew our precise coordinates before he arrived. Our captain ordered crash dive, but the attack had already begun. We realized with absolute horror that our radio call had summoned our executioners. The enemy had tracked our transmission like a beacon. Our most secure communication had become our greatest vulnerability. The transformation from confident hunter to tracked prey happened through technological capability that German submarine crews barely understood. Werner, 24 years old, and trained in traditional submarine tactics, watched his commanding officer struggle to comprehend how Allied forces could locate a submarine through radio transmissions alone. Kapitän zur See Heinrich Lehmann Willenbrock, a veteran of multiple successful patrols and holder of the Knight's Cross, immediately ordered radio silence for the remainder of the patrol. But the damage was done. Every U-boat in his operational area had been transmitting position reports, fuel status updates, and tactical coordination messages for months. Allied HF, DF networks had been tracking German submarine movements across the entire North Atlantic, building detailed plots of patrol routes, operational areas, and tactical patterns. The individual submarine commanders who believed their brief transmissions passed unnoticed had unknowingly provided Allied anti-submarine forces with a comprehensive intelligence picture of Kriegsmarine operations. The HF, DF operators hunting them were young men themselves, many no older than Werner. But they possessed technological advantages that transcended experience or traditional naval skill. Their equipment could reach across hundreds of miles of ocean, detecting radio transmissions that lasted only seconds and pinpointing their source with mathematical precision. Each transmission operated on frequencies between 3 and 30 MHz, well within the detection capability of Allied direction-finding stations. When German submarine radio signals reached HF, DF antenna arrays, rotating mechanical systems measured the precise bearing from which the signals arrived. Multiple stations recording the same transmission created intersecting bearing lines that revealed the transmitter's location. Simple trigonometry converted bearing measurements into geographic coordinates. Every position report transmitted by German submarines was tracked with increasing accuracy as Allied operators refined their techniques and expanded their station networks. What followed was a systematic campaign of destruction that would claim over 70% of all German submariners who served during the war. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was immediate and devastating. Submarine commanders who had operated with confidence in their communication security suddenly faced the prospect that every radio transmission might summon aircraft or surface hunters. The knowledge that Allied forces could track their movements through their own communications created a level of paranoia and operational uncertainty that undermined basic submarine doctrine. U-boat patrol reports from 1942 and 43, discovered in German naval archives after the war, reveal the growing awareness among submarine commanders that their radio security had been compromised. Kapitänleutnant Reinhard Suren, commanding U-564, wrote in his patrol log, "The enemy appears at our location too frequently to be coincidental. Aircraft arrive within hours of our transmission times. We suspect our radio calls are being detected." Similar observations appeared in dozens of patrol reports filed by returning U-boat commanders. The pattern was unmistakable. German submarines transmitting routine operational messages were being located and attacked with suspicious frequency. Yet German naval intelligence, committed to the belief that Enigma encryption was unbreakable, initially attributed these incidents to improved Allied radar or expanded air patrols. The technological reality was more sophisticated and more devastating than even the most pessimistic German assessments. Allied HF, DF networks had evolved from experimental installations into comprehensive tracking systems that monitored German submarine communications across the entire Atlantic theatre. By mid-1942, the Royal Navy operated over 40 shore-based direction-finding stations around the British Isles, each capable of detecting German submarine transmissions at ranges exceeding 800 miles. Additional stations in Canada, Gibraltar, and Iceland created overlapping coverage that could track submarine movements from the Arctic Circle to the Caribbean. The Americans, entering the war with their own HF-DF capabilities, established monitoring stations along the eastern seaboard and integrated their intelligence with British operations through secure communication links. This combined network created detection coverage that extended across virtually the entire North Atlantic, leaving German submarines with no communications sanctuary. German U-boat commanders found themselves trapped in an impossible operational dilemma. Submarine doctrine required frequent communication with headquarters for tactical coordination and operational reporting, but every transmission revealed their location to Allied tracking stations that could dispatch hunting forces with lethal accuracy. The choice between communication and survival became the defining tactical challenge of German submarine operations. Commanders who maintained radio silence could avoid detection but operated without intelligence support, tactical coordination, or strategic guidance. Those who followed standard communication procedures found themselves tracked and hunted by forces that seemed to possess supernatural knowledge of submarine movements. This technological dilemma had no solution within existing German capabilities. The Kriegsmarine lacked the scientific resources, industrial capacity, and strategic intelligence necessary to counter Allied HF, DF networks. German submarine crews were being defeated by applied mathematics and electromagnetic engineering that their training had never addressed. The broader strategic implications were catastrophic for German naval operations. Admiral Dönitz's carefully orchestrated Wolfpack tactics depended entirely on radio coordination between submarines operating in the same general area. Multiple U-boats would be positioned to intercept Allied convoys, with individual commanders reporting contact, coordinating attack approaches, and calling additional submarines to the target. This tactical system required constant radio communication between submarines and headquarters, exactly the type of electromagnetic activity that Allied HF, DF stations were designed to detect and exploit. Every Wolfpack operation became a beacon for Allied anti-submarine forces, who could track multiple submarines simultaneously and position hunting groups to intercept entire German formations. The mathematical precision of HF-DF detection meant that Allied forces possessed detailed intelligence about German submarine dispositions before attacks even began. Convoy routing could be adjusted to avoid known U-boat concentrations. Air patrols could be directed to areas where submarines had revealed their presence through radio transmissions. Surface hunting groups could be positioned to intercept German submarines based on their own communication patterns. By early 1943, the technological imbalance had reached decisive proportions. German submarine losses accelerated dramatically as Allied HF-DF networks achieved comprehensive coverage of the North Atlantic. The individual submarine commanders who had entered the war as invisible hunters found themselves tracked, predicted, and systematically destroyed by technology they could neither understand nor counter. The iron logic of electromagnetic warfare had transformed the Battle of the Atlantic. German submarines that transmitted position reports were located and attacked. Those that maintained radio silence operated without coordination or intelligence support. Either choice led to operational failure and ultimate destruction. For the men who served in U-boats, this technological revolution meant more than tactical defeat. It represented a fundamental transformation in the nature of submarine warfare. They had entered the war, believing in the security of their encrypted communications, confident that brief radio transmissions posed minimal risk, certain that the ocean's vastness provided natural protection against detection. By 1943, these beliefs had been revealed as fatal misconceptions. The electromagnetic spectrum provided no sanctuary. Allied technology could track radio transmissions with mathematical precision, and every communication that German submarines made with their headquarters had become a summons for their own destruction. The technical sophistication of Allied HF-DF operations exceeded German understanding by orders of magnitude. At the Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Centre in London, Commander Roger Wynne supervised a 24-hour tracking room where specialists plotted German submarine movements based entirely on radio intelligence. This facility, designated the Submarine Tracking Room, maintained detailed charts showing the estimated position of every U-boat in the Atlantic. Wynne's team operated with intelligence resources that would have seemed impossible to German naval planners. Multiple HF-DF stations provided continuous monitoring of German submarine frequencies. When U-boats transmitted operational messages, bearing lines from different stations converged on plotting tables to reveal precise locations. The accuracy was extraordinary. Allied operators could determine submarine positions to within 5 nautical miles based on radio transmissions, lasting less than 30 seconds. The mathematics underlying this precision were relatively simple but required technological infrastructure that Germany had never developed. Each HF/DF station consisted of rotating antenna arrays connected to sensitive radio receivers and bearing measurement equipment. When a German submarine transmitted, operators measured the exact compass bearing from which the signal arrived at their station. Multiple stations recording the same. Transmission created intersecting bearing lines on plotting charts. The point where these lines crossed marked the transmitter's location. Atmospheric conditions, signal strength, and operator skill affected accuracy, but the basic geometric principle was infallible. Radio transmissions could be tracked to their source with mathematical certainty. The Royal Navy's HF/DF network had achieved global coverage by late 1942. Shore stations in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and England monitored the eastern Atlantic. Installations in Canada and Newfoundland covered the western approaches. Gibraltar controlled the Mediterranean entrance. Iceland and the Faroe Islands watched the northern passages. Each station operated continuously, manned by shifts of trained operators who monitored German submarine frequencies around the clock. When transmissions were detected, bearing measurements were immediately transmitted to the submarine tracking room in London via secure telephone and telegraph links. Within minutes, submarine positions were plotted and disseminated to operational commanders. This intelligence network provided Allied forces with unprecedented insight into German submarine operations. U-boat patrol patterns, operational areas, tactical movements, and strategic deployments were tracked in real time through the submarine's own communications. German naval planners, unknowingly transmitting their operational intentions through Enigma encrypted messages, provided Allied intelligence with detailed advance warning of submarine attacks. The tactical applications were devastating for German operations. Convoy routes could be adjusted to avoid known submarine concentrations. Anti-submarine aircraft could be directed to areas where U-boats had revealed their presence. Surface hunting groups could be positioned to intercept submarines based on their tracked movements. Individual submarine commanders found themselves facing opponents who seemed to possess supernatural knowledge of their positions and intentions. Kapitänleutnant Wolfgang Luth, commanding U-181 during a patrol in early 1943, experienced the full impact of HF/DF tracking during an attempted attack on convoy ONS-166. Luth's patrol report, filed after returning to base, described the encounter, transmitted position report and convoy contact at 08:15 hours. Enemy aircraft appeared at our location at 08:47 hours, approaching directly from our transmission bearing. No visual contact had been made, no radar emissions detected. Aircraft attacked with precision that indicated prior knowledge of our exact position. Subsequent analysis suggests enemy possesses capability to track our radio transmissions to their source. This represents fundamental change in operational security. Traditional communication procedures may be compromised beyond tactical utility. Similar reports flooded German naval headquarters throughout 1943 as submarine commanders struggled to comprehend how Allied forces could locate them through radio emissions alone. The pattern was consistent across all operational areas. German submarines transmitting routine messages were being tracked and attacked with suspicious accuracy. German naval intelligence, still committed to the belief that Enigma encryption was unbreakable, initially attributed these incidents to improved Allied radar coverage or expanded air patrol patterns. The possibility that radio transmissions themselves could reveal submarine locations was considered but dismissed as technically impossible, given the vast distances involved. This fundamental misunderstanding of Allied capabilities persisted, even as evidence mounted that German communication security had been comprehensively penetrated. The Kriegsmarine's intelligence services possessed neither the technical expertise nor the operational experience necessary to recognize the true scope of Allied HF/DF capabilities. German submarine losses accelerated dramatically throughout 1943 as Allied tracking networks achieved comprehensive coverage of all operational areas. May 1943 became known as Black May among German submariners, as 41 U-boats were lost in a single month. The majority of these losses occurred to submarines that had transmitted routine operational messages within hours of being attacked. The statistical correlation between radio transmissions and submarine losses was unmistakable to operational analysts, but German naval leadership remained committed to existing communication procedures. Admiral Dönitz, convinced that submarine coordination required regular radio contact, refused to impose comprehensive radio silence that might have protected his boats from HF-DF detection. This strategic decision doomed hundreds of German submarines to destruction by their own communications. Every Wolfpack operation that required radio coordination between multiple boats provided Allied HF-DF stations with detailed intelligence about submarine dispositions. Individual submarine commanders who followed standard communication protocols found themselves tracked from the moment they began transmitting. The human cost of this technological imbalance was catastrophic for German submarine crews. Obermaschinist Karl-Heinz Marbach, serving aboard U-405 during the boat's final patrol in November 1943, recorded his observations in a diary recovered from the submarine's wreckage years after the war. "The British find us every time we transmit. Captain believes they are reading our codes, but I think they are tracking our radio signals directly. Aircraft appear too quickly after transmission for coincidence. We are being hunted through our own communications." Morale among crew declining rapidly. Men understand that every message we send may bring enemy aircraft. Radio operators, reluctant to transmit routine reports. We feel tracked, observed, predicted. The ocean no longer provides sanctuary when our radio reveals our position to anyone listening. Marbach's observations reflected the psychological impact of HF-DF tracking on German submarine crews. The knowledge that radio transmissions could betray their location created operational paranoia that undermined basic submarine doctrine. Commanders faced impossible choices between communication and survival, between tactical coordination and electromagnetic silence. The broader strategic implications extended beyond individual submarine losses to the collapse of German naval strategy in the Atlantic. Dönitz's Wolfpack tactics, dependent on radio coordination between multiple submarines, became elaborate suicide missions that provided Allied intelligence with detailed advance warning of German attacks. By late 1943, Allied anti-submarine forces possessed near-complete intelligence about German submarine operations through HF-DF tracking. U-boat patrol areas, attack routes, fuel status, torpedo loads, and operational intentions were monitored in real time through the submarine's own communications. This intelligence advantage allowed Allied forces to achieve tactical and strategic dominance that German submarine crews could neither understand nor counter. The mathematical precision of electromagnetic tracking had transformed submarine warfare into a one-sided technological competition that Germany was destined to lose. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The individual submarine commanders who experienced this technological transformation described their encounters with HF-DF tracking in terms that revealed both tactical shock and existential horror. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Bleichroth, commanding U-109 during multiple war patrols, wrote in his post-war memoir about the moment when technological reality became impossible to ignore. "We transmitted our position to headquarters at 14:30 hours on March 18, 1943, a routine fuel status report that took less than 2 minutes to encode and transmit. At 15:08 hours, a Liberator bomber appeared on the horizon, flying directly toward our position. The aircraft approached from the exact bearing of our transmission antenna, made no searching patterns, dropped depth charges with precision that indicated prior knowledge of our coordinates. We crash-dived immediately, but the attack pattern suggested the pilot knew our position before visual contact was established. After this incident, I began timing the interval between our transmissions and enemy aircraft appearances. The correlation was unmistakable. Every radio call brought hunters within 40 minutes. We were being tracked through our own communications by technology we did not understand. Bleichroth's methodical analysis represented the growing awareness among German submarine commanders that their operational security had been fundamentally compromised. The enemy possessed capabilities that transcended traditional naval warfare, reaching into the electromagnetic spectrum to track submarine movements through radio emissions alone. The technological sophistication of Allied HF/DF operations included innovations that pushed radio direction finding to unprecedented levels of accuracy and coverage. The Royal Navy's high-frequency direction finding stations employed rotating antenna arrays that could measure signal bearings to within 2 degrees of accuracy under optimal conditions. These installations, designated Type FH3 and FH4 by British technical specifications, consisted of multiple antenna elements arranged in precise geometric patterns. When German submarine transmissions were received, operators could rotate the antenna arrays to determine the exact bearing from which signals arrived. Multiple bearings from different stations created triangulation fixes accurate to within nautical miles. The antenna systems themselves represented advanced engineering that German naval intelligence never fully comprehended. Each HF/DF station employed sophisticated receiver equipment capable of detecting weak radio signals across the entire high-frequency spectrum. Sensitive electronic components amplified submarine transmissions that traveled hundreds of miles through atmospheric layers and electromagnetic interference. The operators manning these stations possessed training and expertise that exceeded anything available to German submarine crews. Royal Navy and Royal Air Force personnel assigned to HF/DF duties attended specialized schools where they learned the technical principles of radio propagation, bearing measurement, and signal analysis. These operators could distinguish German submarine transmissions from commercial shipping traffic, amateur radio signals, and atmospheric noise through techniques that combined technical knowledge with operational experience. They understood how radio waves propagated through different atmospheric conditions, how signal strength affected bearing accuracy, and how to compensate for measurement errors caused by electromagnetic interference. The integration of HF/DF intelligence with operational anti-submarine forces represented another level of technological sophistication that Germany never achieved. When Allied tracking stations determined submarine positions, this intelligence was immediately transmitted to relevant operational commanders through secure communication networks. Anti-submarine aircraft received target coordinates via radio while still airborne, allowing them to fly directly to tracked submarine positions. Surface ships could be vectored to intercept U-boats based on their radio transmissions. Even convoy routing decisions incorporated HF/DF intelligence to avoid known submarine concentrations. This real-time integration of intelligence and operations created tactical advantages that German submarine commanders found impossible to counter. Allied forces possessed advance warning of submarine movements, detailed knowledge of operational patterns, and the capability to position hunting groups with precision that seemed supernatural to German crews. The mathematical foundation of HF/DF tracking was elegantly simple, but required technological infrastructure that Germany had never developed. Radio waves transmitted from submarines traveled in straight lines to receiving stations, where sensitive equipment measured the precise bearing from which signals arrived. Multiple stations recording the same transmission created intersecting bearing lines that revealed the transmitter's position through basic trigonometry. The accuracy of this system depended entirely on the precision of bearing measurements and the geometric relationship between tracking stations. Allied engineers had optimized both factors to achieve tracking accuracy that exceeded German estimates by orders of magnitude. Shore-based HF/DF stations were positioned to create overlapping coverage areas with optimal geometric relationships for triangulation calculations. The network design ensured that German submarine transmissions from any location in the North Atlantic would be detected by multiple stations with bearing relationships that produced accurate position fixes. The electronic equipment employed at each station represented the most advanced radio technology available during the war. Sensitive receivers could detect weak signals that had traveled hundreds of miles through atmospheric layers. Precision-bearing measurement equipment could determine signal directions to within degrees of accuracy. The combination of optimal station positioning, advanced electronic equipment, and trained operators created detection capabilities that German naval planners had never anticipated. Every German submarine transmission was being tracked with mathematical precision by a network of Allied stations that operated continuously across the entire Atlantic theatre. The strategic impact of this technological advantage was decisive for the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. German submarine effectiveness collapsed as Allied HF, DF networks achieved comprehensive coverage of all operational areas. The Wolfpack tactics that had devastated Allied shipping during the early war became elaborate suicide missions that provided detailed intelligence about German operations. Individual submarine commanders found themselves facing opponents who possessed complete knowledge of their movements, intentions, and operational patterns. The electromagnetic sanctuary that German crews believed protected their communications had been penetrated by Allied technology that tracked every transmission to its source. By 1944, the technological imbalance had reached decisive proportions. German submarines operating in the Atlantic faced detection and attack whenever they transmitted routine operational messages. The choice between communication and survival had become the defining tactical challenge of German submarine warfare. For the men who served in U-boats during this period, the realization that their radio transmissions were being tracked represented more than tactical defeat. It meant that their most fundamental operational assumptions had been proven wrong, that their training had been based on misconceptions about enemy capabilities, and that their survival depended on abandoning the communication procedures that made coordinated submarine operations possible. The sound of their own radio transmissions had become the audio signature of their vulnerability, marking them for destruction by forces they could neither see nor escape. The electromagnetic spectrum provided no sanctuary from Allied technology that had transformed submarine warfare into a one-sided technological competition. The final acknowledgement of Allied HF-DF capabilities came not from individual submarine commanders, but from the highest levels of German naval command. By early 1944, Admiral Karl Dönitz faced statistical evidence that could no longer be dismissed or explained through conventional analysis. German submarine losses had reached catastrophic levels, with correlation patterns that pointed unmistakably to communication security failures. The Kriegsmarine's Operational Research Division, tasked with analyzing submarine effectiveness, produced reports that documented the relationship between radio transmissions and submarine losses with mathematical precision. U-boats that transmitted routine operational messages suffered attack rates 67% higher than submarines maintaining strict radio silence. The correlation was too strong to attribute to coincidence, improved Allied radar, or expanded air patrol coverage. Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, serving as staff officer for submarine operations at BDOU headquarters, later described the moment when German naval leadership finally comprehended the scope of Allied tracking capabilities. His post-war account, published in 1968, revealed the shock that accompanied this technological revelation. Admiral Dönitz called an emergency conference in February 1944 to address the submarine loss crisis. Intelligence officers presented charts showing the correlation between radio transmission times and subsequent attacks. The pattern was undeniable. Our submarines were being tracked through their own communications. The Admiral studied the data for several minutes in complete silence. Then he asked the question that changed everything. How long have the British been able to track our radio signals? The intelligence officer replied that evidence suggested comprehensive tracking capability had existed since late 1942. We had been operating under false assumptions about communication security for over 18 months. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Every Wolfpack operation, every tactical coordination message, every routine position report had provided the enemy with detailed intelligence about our submarine dispositions. We had been helping them hunt our own boats. This revelation forced German naval command to confront the technological reality that had been systematically destroying their submarine force. The Allies possessed direction-finding capabilities that exceeded German estimates by orders of magnitude. Radio transmissions that German submariners believed were secure had been tracked with mathematical precision since the early war period. The strategic implications were devastating for German naval operations. Wolf pack tactics, the foundation of German submarine doctrine, required constant radio communication between boats operating in the same area. Individual submarines needed to report convoy contacts, coordinate attack approaches, and call for tactical support from nearby boats. This communication requirement, designed to maximize operational effectiveness, had become a systematic intelligence leak that provided Allied forces with advance warning of every German submarine operation. The tactical coordination that German planners considered essential for submarine success had been transformed into a comprehensive surveillance network that tracked German movements in real time. Dönitz faced an impossible operational dilemma. Maintaining radio communication allowed tactical coordination but guaranteed detection by Allied HF/DF networks. Imposing radio silence protected submarines from tracking but eliminated the coordination necessary for effective wolf pack operations. Either choice represented strategic defeat for German submarine warfare. The Admiral's response revealed both the sophistication of German tactical thinking and the limitations imposed by technological inferiority. New operational procedures implemented in March 1944 attempted to minimize radio transmissions while maintaining essential communication. Submarines were instructed to transmit only emergency messages, use abbreviated code formats, and limit transmission duration to absolute minimums. These measures reduced but could not eliminate the HF/DF tracking problem. Even brief emergency transmissions could be detected and triangulated by Allied stations. The fundamental vulnerability remained. Any radio communication revealed submarine positions to tracking networks that operated with mathematical precision across the entire Atlantic theater. German submarine crews adapted to these new procedures with the desperate efficiency of men who understood that their survival depended on electromagnetic silence. Funkmaat Herbert Wohlfarth, serving aboard U-256 during the final phase of the Atlantic campaign, recorded in his diary the psychological impact of operating under strict communication restrictions. "We maintain almost complete radio silence now. No routine position reports, no tactical coordination messages, no contact with other boats. We operate alone, blind to friendly forces, dependent entirely on our own resources. The ocean feels larger when you cannot communicate with anyone. Our radio equipment remains functional, but we dare not use it except for genuine emergencies. Every transmission might bring aircraft within the hour. We have learned to fear our own radio more than enemy depth charges. At least we can hear depth charges exploding. Radio signals betray us silently. Morale suffers when we cannot coordinate with other submarines or receive intelligence updates from headquarters. We feel isolated, abandoned, forgotten, but we are alive. Boats that continue transmitting routine messages disappear within days." Wohlfarth's observations reflected the broader transformation in German submarine operations during the final war period. Submarines that had once operated as coordinated wolf packs now patrolled individually, maintaining electromagnetic silence that protected them from HF/DF detection but eliminated their tactical effectiveness. The psychological cost of this isolation was enormous for German submarine crews. Young men who had trained for coordinated operations found themselves operating alone in hostile waters, cut off from friendly forces, dependent entirely on their own tactical judgment. The radio equipment that should have connected them to a broader operational network had become their greatest vulnerability. Individual submarine commanders adapted to these constraints with varying degrees of success. Those who imposed absolute radio discipline achieved higher survival rates but operated with reduced tactical effectiveness. Commanders who continued transmitting tactical messages maintained operational capability but faced systematic destruction by Allied forces, guided by HF/DF intelligence. Kapitänleutnant Klaus Barkston, commanding U-563 during multiple war patrols in 1944, developed operational procedures that represented the ultimate adaptation to Allied tracking capabilities. His post-war memoir described the careful balance between communication, necessity, and electromagnetic security. We transmitted only when absolutely essential, used predetermined code phrases to minimize transmission duration, and changed radio frequencies unpredictably to complicate tracking efforts. Every message was planned in advance, encoded before transmission, and sent in the shortest possible time. Even with these precautions, we understood that any transmission revealed our approximate position to Allied tracking stations. We accepted this risk only for genuine tactical emergencies or critical intelligence that could not be delayed. Routine communication had become impossible. Operational effectiveness declined dramatically under these restrictions. We could not coordinate with other submarines, request tactical guidance, or report enemy contacts in real time. But we survived when other boats were destroyed. Radio silence meant isolation, but transmission meant death. Bargston's tactical adaptations represented the final evolution of German submarine doctrine in response to Allied HF-DF capabilities. The coordinated wolf pack operations that had terrorized Allied shipping during the early war had been replaced by individual submarine patrols that maintained survival through electromagnetic silence. The strategic impact of this transformation was decisive for the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. German submarine effectiveness collapsed as wolf pack coordination became impossible and individual boats operated without tactical support or strategic intelligence. Allied shipping losses declined dramatically as German submarines struggled to locate convoys without radio intelligence networks. By late 1944, the technological balance had shifted so completely in favor of Allied forces that German submarine operations became essentially ineffective. HF-DF tracking networks provided comprehensive surveillance of any German submarine that dared to transmit, while those maintaining radio silence operated in tactical isolation that prevented effective attacks. The mathematical precision of Allied direction finding had transformed submarine warfare into a technological competition that Germany could not win. The electromagnetic spectrum, once considered neutral territory, had become dominated by Allied tracking capabilities that stripped away German operational security through applied mathematics and engineering excellence. The human cost of this technological imbalance was catastrophic for German submarine personnel. The Kriegsmarine lost over 28,000 submariners during the war, representing a casualty rate exceeding 75% of all personnel who served in U-boats. The majority of these losses occurred after Allied HF-DF networks achieved comprehensive operational capability. Individual submarine crews paid with their lives for their services' failure to recognize the scope of Allied technological capabilities. Young men who had volunteered for submarine duty, believing in German technical superiority, found themselves hunted by detection systems that exceeded their training, experience, and tactical understanding. The post-war revelation of Allied capabilities came as a profound shock to surviving German submarine veterans. The technological sophistication of HF-DF operations, the comprehensive coverage of Allied tracking networks, and the mathematical precision of direction-finding calculations exceeded anything German naval intelligence had estimated during the war. Fregattenkapitän Otto Kretschmer, the highest-scoring German submarine commander who survived the war, learned the full scope of Allied capabilities during post-war interviews with British naval intelligence officers. His reaction, recorded in 1946, captured the sense of technological surprise that characterized German veteran responses. They showed me charts of our patrol routes traced from radio transmissions alone. Every position report, every tactical message, every operational communication had been plotted with accuracy that seemed impossible. They knew our movements better than we did. The British officer explained their direction-finding methods with casual precision that demonstrated complete technical mastery. Multiple stations, triangulation calculations, real-time intelligence distribution. They had created a tracking network that made submarine operations transparent to their forces. We believed our encrypted transmissions were secure, that brief radio calls posed minimal risk, that the ocean's vastness provided natural protection. All of these assumptions were wrong. We had been operating under fundamental misconceptions about enemy capabilities throughout the entire war. Kretschmer's testimony reflected the broader recognition among German submarine veterans that they had been defeated by technological capabilities they had never understood. The Allied HF/DF networks that tracked their movements represented applied science and engineering that transcended traditional naval warfare. The strategic lessons of this technological competition extended far beyond the immediate tactical impact on submarine operations. The Battle of the Atlantic demonstrated how rapidly technological innovation could shift strategic balance, how intelligence capabilities could determine operational outcomes, and how communication security could become the decisive factor in military effectiveness. German submarine warfare, once the most effective naval strategy in military history, had been neutralized by Allied technological superiority that operated in the electromagnetic spectrum. Radio transmissions that German crews considered routine communications had become intelligence beacons that guided Allied forces to their targets with mathematical precision. The broader implications for modern warfare were profound and enduring. The HF/DF tracking networks that detected German submarines established principles of electronic warfare that would dominate military thinking for decades. The ability to track enemy communications, determine their locations, and coordinate tactical responses became fundamental capabilities for all modern military forces. In 1978, 33 years after the war's end, a small gathering of German submarine veterans met with their former Allied opponents at a naval history symposium in Portsmouth, England. The meeting brought together men who had hunted and been hunted through electromagnetic tracking during the war's decisive period. Admiral Sir Peter Gretton, who had commanded Allied escort groups during the Battle of the Atlantic, addressed the assembled veterans about the technological competition that had determined their war's outcome. His remarks, preserved in conference transcripts, acknowledged both the human cost and strategic significance of HF/DF operations. Your submarines represented the greatest threat to Allied victory during the war's critical period. Your crews displayed courage, skill, and determination that commanded our respect even as we fought to destroy you. But you were defeated by technology, not by any failure of personal character or tactical competence. Our HF/DF networks provided us with intelligence advantages that your training never addressed. We could track your movements through your own communications, predict your operations through radio analysis, and coordinate our responses through real-time intelligence distribution. This technological superiority proved more decisive than traditional naval capabilities. You fought bravely against odds you never understood. The electromagnetic spectrum had become a battlefield where mathematical precision determined tactical outcomes. Your defeat teaches us that technological innovation can transform warfare faster than doctrine, training, or courage can adapt. The German veterans listened in respectful silence as Admiral Gretton explained the technical details of operations that had cost so many of their comrades' lives. Then Fregattenkapitän Reinhard Hardigan, a veteran of multiple Atlantic patrols, responded on behalf of his fellow survivors. We entered this war believing in our technical superiority, confident in our tactical training, certain that German engineering would provide decisive advantages. We learned through bitter experience that technological competition determines modern warfare outcomes more than traditional military virtues. Your HF/DF systems tracked us through our own communications, guided your forces to our positions, and coordinated attacks with precision we could not counter. We were defeated by applied mathematics, electromagnetic engineering, and intelligence capabilities that exceeded our understanding. Those of us who survived did so largely through luck and the eventual recognition that radio silence meant survival. We honor our fallen comrades by acknowledging the truth. We were defeated by superior technology applied with systematic precision. This lesson transcends our particular war and speaks to the fundamental nature of modern military competition. The exchange between former enemies acknowledged the technological reality that had determined the Battle of Atlantic's outcome. German submarine crews had been defeated not by superior courage or tactical skill, but by Allied technological capabilities that operated in domains their training had never addressed. The strategic impact of Allied HF/DF operations extended far beyond immediate tactical victories to decisive influence on the war's ultimate outcome. British food imports, which had fallen to critically dangerous levels during 1942, recovered dramatically as German submarine effectiveness collapsed under technological pressure. The massive build-up of American forces in Britain for D-Day proceeded without significant interference as Allied shipping losses declined to manageable levels. The Atlantic supply line, which Winston Churchill later identified as his greatest wartime concern, became secure through technological dominance that neutralized the submarine threat. Germany's strategy of strangling Britain through submarine blockade failed not because of inadequate submarines or insufficient crews, but because Allied technology had transformed the electromagnetic spectrum into a comprehensive surveillance network that tracked every German naval movement. In the final analysis, the story of Kriegsmarine captains encountering Allied HF-DF capabilities represents one of history's clearest examples of technological surprise determining strategic outcomes. German submariners entered the war with justified confidence in their communication, security, and operational procedures, believing their encrypted transmissions provided adequate protection against enemy detection. They discovered too late that Allied technology could track radio signals with mathematical precision, triangulate transmission sources to within nautical miles, and coordinate tactical responses with real-time intelligence that exceeded German capabilities by orders of magnitude. The ocean provided no sanctuary from electromagnetic tracking that operated continuously across the entire Atlantic theater. German submarine crews finished the war as the most casualty-prone military service of any nation, with losses exceeding 75% of all personnel who served. Between their initial confidence and ultimate defeat lay 28,000 individual tragedies. Men who drowned in iron coffins at the bottom of the Atlantic, victims of technology they could neither understand nor counter. The sound that transformed their war was not the metallic ping of sonar striking steel hulls, but the silent transmission of their own radio signals that painted electromagnetic targets visible to Allied tracking networks. Their communications, intended to coordinate tactical operations and maintain contact with headquarters, became beacons that summoned their own destruction. For German submarine crews, this represented a fundamental lesson about the nature of technological warfare. Communications, security, electromagnetic discipline, and signal intelligence had become more decisive than torpedo accuracy, diving speed, or navigation skill. The traditional naval virtues that had dominated submarine training were overwhelmed by technological capabilities that operated in domains their education had never addressed. The legacy of Allied HF-DF operations echoes through every aspect of modern and military communications. The principle that radio transmissions can be tracked to their source, that electronic emissions reveal tactical information, and that communications security determines operational survival has become fundamental to contemporary warfare. Every submarine that patrols beneath the world's oceans, every detection system that searches for them, every communication protocol that seeks either security or interception traces its doctrinal foundation to the technological competition that destroyed German submarine effectiveness in the Atlantic. The electromagnetic spectrum remains a battlefield where mathematical precision determines tactical outcomes. The German submarine crews who first realized their radio transmissions were being tracked paid with their lives to teach lessons that transcend their particular defeat. Technology transforms warfare faster than training, doctrine, or courage can adapt. Communications security determines operational survival in modern military competition, and electromagnetic discipline has become as essential to tactical success as traditional naval capabilities. Their experience stands as testament to a profound truth about technological warfare. Superior engineering, mathematical precision, and systematic intelligence capabilities prove more decisive than individual courage, tactical skill, or strategic determination. The Allied HF-DF networks that tracked German submarines represented applied science that determined strategic outcomes through electromagnetic dominance. For the men who served in U-boats during this technological transformation, the realization that their radio signals betrayed their positions marked more than tactical defeat. It represented the recognition that modern warfare had fundamentally changed, that traditional naval competition had been superseded by technological contests operating in invisible spectrums. The sound of their radio transmissions, intended to connect them with friendly forces and coordinate tactical operations, had become the audio signature of their vulnerability. Every message they sent revealed their location to enemies who possessed technological capabilities that transcended conventional naval warfare. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.